What's going on, guys? Long time no see. I went to Dagestan for 5 months and forgot to upload. Some big things have happened in the world of combat sports since I've been gone, but I want to talk about this past weekend of fighting where we saw the final Fighting Nerds undefeated record disappear. John Silva versus Diego Lopes was one of those fights that you saw and you knew it was going to be the most exciting part of the weekend basically. Regardless of hype or intrigue, as it felt like it was completely overshadowed from the masses by Canelo versus Crawford. And outside of a couple of moments, that boxing fight did not really captivate me in the same way that the UFC Noche's main event did. Like, I was glued to the screen from John Silva's walkout all the way to Diego Lopes's post-fight interview. Whereas with the boxing fight, or would you even want to call it a fight? I think it's more like a match, personally. It barely feels like a fight with those big padded gloves and the absence of attacks like elbows, knees, kicks, and spinning stuff. And with the boxing match itself, I felt like I took 5 piss breaks from the intro to the intros, the national anthems, thanking everyone that was a part of the event, and then finally the fight itself. One of the best things about the production of Dana White's UFC events is that the pacing is really good. You play like one match of Clash Royale and the promo for the next fight is already on the screen, and by the time you finish your second match, the first fighter is walking out already, and that's like at its slowest. That sweet UFC pacing that I'm accustomed to did not translate over to the boxing event. It just felt super slow and drawn out, and I think that's part of the reason why people like me prefer to watch the UFC over boxing, and the other part being that the sport of MMA itself is way more enjoyable to watch than boxing is. Alright, but let's actually talk about that main event between Diego Lopes and Jean Silva. It was about as wild and chaotic as someone could hope for. Definitely like round and a half of the year for sure, I think. But the fight starts off and Jean Silva opens by hand fighting and follows it up with the front kick to the face. It seems like he was just trying to get his range off of this, and we'll see this front kick come out a bunch of more times, but the two basically trade leg kicks and teeps until Jean Silva gets a little too eccentric with his striking and goes for a spin kick to the head and gets taken down off of that. Diego did exactly what Alexa Grasso did to Shevchenko in their fight, and it's funny to think about that Diego was even in Grasso's corner for that championship fight, so I imagine that the two of them drilled that same move over and over together. Jean, as well as maybe all of the Fighting Nerds' weakness, shows here. It's their overconfidence and their grappling ability. Jean gets taken down because he felt way too confident in his striking and treated having Diego on his back like a joke, like it was a one-time slip-up and Diego possibly couldn't do anything. Oh, Diego has mount. Jean Silva at least did better than Rufy did, trying to fight Diego Lopes's hands, but still ended up in that full mount. Jean tried to buck Diego off of him once before accepting the position and allowing Diego to get high up on Jean's chest, but by then it's too late. If you let someone settle into full mount, it's so hard to get them off, especially when you were dry like these two were, and even more when Jean Silva forgot to put more points into his wrestling stats and maxed out his offensive striking. Once he threw his hands around Diego's back and kind of just held him there, I thought it was going to be over, and I was almost right. The 12-6 elbow changes the game in full mount, because you can't just tuck your head into someone's chest and expect them not to throw strikes, because now you can, now that 12-6 elbows are allowed. And the first one that landed cut Jean Silva open, and Diego Lopes starts to smile because he knows he's got this guy and he's just holding on for dear life. Diego starts to put it on Silva for like a little over a minute and it looks like it's gonna be stopped, but credit to Jean because he's still trying to be nonchalant and smile through it. But right as Mike Beltran calls for the Silva to fight back, he manages to underhook Diego's leg, and because Diego was high up focusing on finishing the fight, he manages to flip them both over, winding up in Diego's open guard and retreats before he's able to get that full guard back or go for what appears to be an armbar or maybe a triangle choke. But they're back on the feet and you see Jean's ego come out a little bit again with the right straight that way overextends, but he jabs to the body and he sets up the front kick off of it that lands clean. But Diego Lopes is a blockhead and eats it like it's nothing. You see them both kind of reset after this, and Jean's overall defense is not as high level as I thought. A lot of the time he just tries to slip and rip, but being the shorter fighter with a 3.5 reach disadvantage, it's gonna be hard to pull that kind of thing off. And Diego Lopes had a beautiful jab. He didn't overextend with it at all like Jean Silva did with a lot of his strikes, so he's in the perfect spot to just watch what Jean does and sees all of the strikes coming to him. With all that leaning, his hands are down. It opens it up for jab left hook, which we saw land a couple times, similar to like Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia. And also with the leaning, his legs were getting beat up pretty bad. And I think that's one of the reasons why he was stumbling around the octagon a lot, also with his overextending. But it looks like Jean Silva is starting to settle in with the straights to the body and setting things up, being much more conventional and fundamental. But they have some back and forth and they crash into each other because Jean once again overextends and they land into the clinch, and that's like one of Diego's best spots to land because he's so powerful and he can eat whatever they're throwing back at him. And he skims Jean Silva's forehead with an uppercut, it looks like. But Jean Silva switches from that left hook to loading up on his right straights. Diego gets tagged by multiple right straights from this point on, but once again, Jean overextends and Diego, like last round, takes advantage of Jean's striking to get him on the ground. Jean ends up in bottom side control, but is able to get out of this position, unlike the full mount position, by wrestling for a single leg, and Diego goes for a dart stroke, it looks like, but because the two of them are so slippery and Jean's so quick, it doesn't work at all. So they reset, and Jean Silva looks like he's getting into that flow state, looking like he did against Drew Dober, just landing shots, getting out of the way. But at the same time, Diego is still pressing forward, keeping the pressure on. But Jean gets too loose and too confident in his striking, throwing like 3 elbows in a row, attempting a spinning elbow while moving forward, which is much more difficult to land than moving backwards, and you see why literally in the next exchange. Jean Silva has his hands down, following Diego instead of using his footwork to cut him off or using the kicks to block him from moving and circling away, just following him with his hands down, and Diego throws his own spinning elbow and catches Jean Silva entering, and it was basically over from right there. The elbow and the barrage of punches that follow it are just too much for Jean Silva, and the fight gets stopped right there. One of the best fights of this year, without a doubt. Crazy finishing sequence, and it looked like each guy was about to win multiple times. I honestly think that one day that these two guys are gonna rematch. Jean showed that he has the talent to be there, but he believes he's invincible and just needs to go back to the drawing board, work on his defense, and not letting the moment get the best of him. Like, through all of his fights, he's taunting, and it works against these lower level guys, but against the number 2 in the world, it's gonna be a different story. You gotta be on your A game, can't be messing around. You gotta be locked in and focused. Him and all of the fighting nerds, they need to go back to Brazil, work on their defense, work on their grappling. Jean's boxing looked pretty good, and he was beating Diego to the punches, even getting through that high, tight guard. It was a really good win for Diego. I mean, he was able to eat all of the biggest shots and was the one on the front foot the entire time, and solidifies him as being part of that upper echelon of the featherweight division. Volk's win over him is aging really good. But for Diego, I think that next, he should be fighting Yair. It should have been the fight that we saw last weekend, but it's better late than never, I guess. The winner of that fight could get the next title shot after Volk versus Murphy. I think a good fight for Jean Silva would be Josh Emmett. It would be crazy good because you know Josh Emmett's going to eat everything that Jean Silva throws at him, and it has the potential to make Jean Silva look really good. But that's all I really want to talk about today. I got off work late, so I didn't get to see much of the fight card for UFC Noche, just really the last 3 fights, bits and pieces, except the main event. I got to see that one in its entirety. It felt like it was completely overshadowed by Canelo Crawford, but that's to be expected. That is a generational type of boxing fight. And if you remember, UFC Noche was supposed to be a pay-per-view, but then that boxing match came together, so that was kind of scrapped, and it just became a fight night. Definitely does not feel as atmospheric or as epic as the Sphere did last year. But that's all I got today. So if you're still here, thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering me. And if you don't know who I am, then better make sure to hit that subscribe button with the spinning elbow. And I'll catch you all soon.